A reason why I'm making this channel is because in a lot of ways Germany is ahead of the curve when it comes to a lot of draconian measures that will eventually reach America or the rest of the world. First, Antifa reached America. That is an organization somewhat emerging in the 50s, gaining track in the 70s, and it was only very recently, maybe 10 years ago or so, that it made it to America and to Great Britain. It has a much longer and a much stronger history here. There are entire areas that are occupied by these people, lawless rooms that the police do not dare to walk into. And this has now spread like a cancer. The second thing that you all know is internet censorship. There was this hot mic situation when Angela Merkel talked to Mark Zuckerberg and asked him to do something. And he followed through. Facebook is now fiercely censored. I mean, it's ridiculous. And this was all inspired by Angela Merkel and by Germans. And I can announce with certainty that the following thing will also come to you. And that is that your forests die. At least that's what they will claim. The forest first died in the 1980s. At least that is what we were told non-stop. What they mean is that some patches of the forest are always dying. I mean, you always have some trees that decay, while in some other patches on the area, life flourishes. That's nature. That's how things work. But what the media did back then in the 1980s is that they photographed the fringes of the woods where some stuff went on, and apparently some trees died, and they magnified the problem. And they had all these people making weird statistics and trying to figure out how much of the tree should live but doesn't live. And it is a weird situation that is now recurring, actually. Back then in the 1980s, the culprit was some particles in the air. And still today, environmentalists claim the state had saved the forests by, asking car manufacturers to put filters into their cars, as if they would have never thought of it themselves. And without the German state, we all would not have catalyzers in our cars. Of course, that's complete rubbish, and there were already catalyzers around in the 1980s. What actually improved was the science. With the science, it has absolutely nothing to do with the politicians in charge. It was just people who were ambitious, tried to create more effective technologies, and that is why there are less particles in the air. But the particles were never the reason why some trees eventually die. Trees eventually die. All living beings eventually die. And that was what the Waldsterben was back then, the death of the forest. The death of the forest is a word that doesn't really exist in English. There is an article on Wikipedia that speaks of a forest dieback. And because you have not heard of this term, they make clear at the very beginning that the proper word for it is actually the German Waldsterben. But there's also a second word, Waldschäden, which means destruction of wood. So you have the death of wood and the destruction of wood, and for none of this English words exist because it isn't a real thing. It is a media hype, and some forest keepers may buy into that hype also abroad, and they have to use German words because it is propaganda. The industry behind it is the Greta Thunberg stuff, at least now the second cycle, as it now recovers. It is this Plant for the Planet racket. Plant for the Planet was inspired by the Nobel Peace Prize to Wangari Maathai. She planted some trees in Kenya and was awarded for it. It was a big news story. You probably remember 2003, the first black woman to ever receive, the first black woman from Kenya to ever receive the Nobel Peace Prize. And of course, she has done absolutely nothing for peace whatsoever. She just planted trees. And this inspired Felix and Fridtjof Finkbeiner, a father and a son, to found Planet for the Planet. It was already back then a similar story like the Greta Thunberg stuff. Felix was a miner at the time, and he was trotted out of the media to speak about climate change and trees and nature and so on. So that was the proto Greta Thunberg. And there's a real connection to Greta Thunberg because Fridays for Future gets the accounting administered by Plant for the Planet. So this is the foundation that you have to write the check to if you support Fridays for Future. And Plant for the Planet was also a project of, you guess it, the United Nations, but they do not openly say so. They say it's supporting it in some capacity, but the reality really is that they have turned it into an organization within the UNEP, the United Nations Environmental Program. So this is the entire Greta Thunberg stuff is actually a project of the United Nations. That's something hardly anybody in the media ever tells you. But as I've already mentioned in my previous video, whenever you see a child dominant in a media story, for no good reason whatsoever, you can guess that some people with some military experience are behind it. So you shouldn't be surprised that Friday for Future and Felix Finkbein and his Plant for the Planet are driven by the United Nations and are probably inspired by some military people who thought about getting taxpayer money whirling around and seeding some discomfort in some areas of the public. With a budget of 200 million euro per year, the forests are supposed to be changed in a way that they resist the climate change. And for whatever reason that is done with a certain mixture of trees and plants they have designed in the laboratory. And what I really find astonishing about this Green Party approach of how they have to plan the forests. I'm not kidding. The state has to plan the forest and the plants in it and the animals that should roam it. Is that it defies the basic idea of nature. I mean, the whole point really is that you leave it alone. But our state wants to control every aspect of our lives, and it can't even stop for nature. And the party that claims to be for the protection of nature is the one that tries to control every single aspect of it and wants a man-made landscape. And of course, this is also a huge racket. Hundreds of people are supposed to be hired to serve the forest, and there's actually an interview and on site right now with a guy called Dohle who says that the trees and plants must be taken into people's hands and planted. So he actually has in mind that every individual tree must be hand treated by people who do just something, and this is probably to deal with the unemployment. The issue is not really the forest. The issue is now the issue, as David Horowitz already noted. The revolution is always the issue. In this case, it is the stupefaction of the public, because people are supposed to be kept busy with stuff that is obviously stupid. It's completely nonsense. A wood does not need to be cared for. The whole point of nature is that it cares for itself. You can't leave it alone. It just does the job. What they want is they want taxpayer money to be wasted. They want more stress to be put on those who are actually net payers of taxpayer money, and to create discomfort among these groups. Those who are working on these unprofitable nonsense jobs get dissatisfied because they see no purpose in planting trees when they know trees grow on their own. And people who work on these high-powering jobs all day long to finance this rubbish are also dissatisfied. So sooner or later this will result in one revolt or the other, and this is what is planned at the long hand. One reason why this entire topic gains traction is because we have on the state level ministries for the forests. Forest ministers, I'm not kidding, came together this Thursday to discuss the future development of the trees. Our Federal Minister of Agriculture, Julia Klöckner, apparently we have a federal ministry of agriculture that also cares for trees, as if trees were crops. She announced that there will be a summit, a forest summit in September, to check out what money can flow and how many people must be hired and so on. And there are still the guilds. I have mentioned this a number of times. We are going back into the Middle Ages, and Germany still has what used to be the guilds. They do not call themselves guilds anymore, but they are calling it Verbände. It is the same thing. Different professions somehow come together in groups, and they are speaking as a collective. They have these lobby groups, but they are not real lobby groups. They are divided up by their very professions. And the guild that plays in here is the Bund Deutsche Forstleute. That literally translates to the Association of German Forced People. It sounds as strange in German as it sounds in English. So this guild of the forced people, or the forest people, is for all forest workers, people who cut the trees, remove dead wood, and so on. And of course, everybody joins in the choir. The Green Party speaker, Katrin Göring-Eckardt, is very outspoken about shelling out ever more money. And the justification this time is no longer the particles in the air. Nobody is buying this anymore, but now it's climate change. And not only is the climate change now the reason for the supposed death of the wood, but also that the wood would be the protection against the climate change. I don't know really how that works. I don't really know, what they are trying to save. This is never really asked. And a number of these forest ministers are in the so-called Conservative Party. It's not a Conservative Party. It is a no-purpose party, the party of Angela Merkel, the Union. And what these people do is they have no platform. They don't claim to be conservative in the sense that Maggie Thatcher was conservative or that Ronald Reagan was conservative. They have no principles. They have no politics. What they have is a greed for power, and they justify whatever they do with, semantics. They just use words to claim they are saving something or protecting something, conserving something. That's why they say we are conservative. So now you have the windmills to just conserve the climate, and you have the trees to just conserve the quality of the ground or whatever, and you have whatever policy issue you have, it is there to preserve something that you wanted to always have, that you always liked. It is the same thing. You can justify any progressive policy with claiming that you preserve something else, and it is a play with words replacing actual politics, and it will come to you. The Green New Deal is the start. The Democratic Party is undermined by the Green Party. They look like fringes now, and their power is growing. Everybody thinks that the Green Party in the US plays no role. They do. They will absolutely they will absolutely occupy the same strategically relevant places in society to revert your system and turn your country into a dictatorship. You think now that AOC is batshit crazy and people will recognize that soon enough, and America would never become socialist and would never become a third world country. You are wrong. You are wrong. It will go down very quickly, because these people are good at undermining existing structures. And AOC was never somebody who would have, been a leader in the early Democratic Party like Joe Biden could have been. She was never a working class person. Only because you work as a bartender for some time does not make you understand the entire culture and the issues and the worries and so on, particularly not when you come from a wealthy family like AOC does. And it will come to you. Your forest will die, and it will die very soon, and you will have a lot of pictures of some dead trees, and the media pretending that all your trees are dying like mad. A note here, in the 80s, when Germany was claiming that all trees are dying, there was also some panic in the north of the United States. It will be revived. You will see the return of the dead trees from the living. That was for today, and I'll see you soon. Bye.